So this is the small village of Dottleston, and you can see there's a ley line right there above it in red. So you zoom out once, there's that one ley line. Zoom out again, and you see one going right through Chester. I've been looking for footage of Dottleston all over the place, and I've found some cute stuff. It's a cute little town, you guys, and still today it seems to have remained small enough to have retained some of its traditions, and it's a very charming, cute town. Right below the ley lines, it's in Chester County. So I went back through my other parts of the series to see what I wanted to circle back to, questions I was asking. The first thing I wanted to do was look up that weird cryptic poem, and I looked up almost every single phrase from it, and nothing brought me to anything except for the Pussycat poem, which I know was something that was a rhyme or a song. So I looked it up. It was written in 1807, so it would have been well in circulation at this time. So time's matching up. Looking at this map makes me understand what they were saying in that class. Like that basically if you saw another, or if you named another site of antiquity over there, you could just extend the line. That makes sense. Aren't these ley lines cool? I just want to point out that the patterns are often kind of like a pyramid. This is actually the first time I've looked up ley lines. It's very fascinating to me. The other thing I wanted to circle back to is Erasmus. Desiderius Erasmus is a real person. He was kind of a hero when it comes to the Reformation. Basically what he did was he put a lot of focus on the person's internal morality and less focus on rituals. Kind of important, he introduced the threefold division of body, soul, and spirit. This kind of makes me wonder if Lucas is still testing them in a way, or if he's just sharing his philosophies, because Erasmus, he was a key figure in the Reformation. He wasn't just one of Lucas's pals, but in one of the instances he actually says that, my friend Desiderius. So it is kind of a big discrepancy. He would be a pioneer in what people would later call Christian humanism. The next thing I wanted to look into is another person that Lucas mentions. He speaks of Edmund Gray. Gray spelled with an E. Now, the first thing that comes up when you look up Edmund Gray with his spelling is the first Earl of Kent in the 1400s, so it obviously can't be that Edmund Gray. So, dude, I looked everywhere trying to find this Gray family, and at first I thought I had found something in these Cheshire Cheeses documents. So, one of the things that Lucas talks about is Edmund Gray's farm. He boasts about this farm and the cheeses. Do you remember how he described the cheeses? It was pretty funny. So he talks about how his friend Edmund Gray has a 4-course rotation of fallow. And so I don't know much about farming, but I know that having a 4-course rotation of fallow is a good thing. And I think it means that you can produce more. So I looked everywhere for this Gray family. I looked through the cheese records, I guess you could say. There is a history of Cheshire cheeses, and reading it made me very hungry, but I could not locate the family. The computer me is just checking out these bodies of water right next to ley lines, saying how it might be a big conductor, and I'll talk about what I mean by that later. The next thing that came up for Edmund Gray, which I think is kind of interesting, is that he was a popular character on All My Children. All My Children was pretty popular around the time that this was all going on. Bangor on Dee was mentioned. Remember that? That river just looks like a ribbon. It looks so beautiful. And it goes on forever. In part two, I'm talking about how boring I think they are for verifying everything. And here I am in this video trying to verify everything. So anyway, Aldersay was another name that Lucas had mentioned. And that was another name that they were researching in the library that they didn't have much luck on. I just typed it in, and my first look, it's a civil parish in the Unitary Authority of Cheshire West and Chester in the ceremonial county of Cheshire, England. It contains the villages of Aldersay Green, Aldersay Park, and is about 9 miles southeast of Chester. According to the 2001 census, the parish had a population of 72, increasing to 132 at the 2011 census. Wow. This is the Aldersay War Memorial. I want to say just because I couldn't trace these particular people back doesn't mean that these families didn't exist. The Gray family did very much exist, and so did the Aldersay family around that time. It gets really murky. I just found a map of Cheshire from 1842 where you can click on each piece of land to see who owned it. And I can't find any of those old names that we were talking about, but I've familiarized myself with the whole history of this place now, and I think that the sheriff's names, the landowners' names, I think all those names will just stick in my head. So hopefully when I read something, it will just stand out to me now. This is the part of the map that looks like an anatomical heart. Anyway, in that map, I found that it looks like most of the valuable lands were owned by the Marquis of Westminster, who was Robert Grosvenor, first Marquis of Westminster, 1767 to 1845. Computer me is just chasing this river all over the place. See where it begins, and soon you're going to see where it ends. So Marquis of Westminster is another big name that in my research I came across for that time period that I haven't heard Lucas mention. I'm going to look out for all these names in the future now that I know them. I also looked up that Latin phrase that Lucas wrote that that Latin teacher said was dog Latin. I don't even know what she meant by that, but okay, so it doesn't make sense though. When I typed it in, the translate says something like, this muse of the Gnosi, and then there's some nonsense words, and then what the Latins are not as useful, like the Latins are not as useful for something, and something about a muse. That's all I can gather. I just came across some information about Dawdleston that I think is interesting. Apparently, it contains 13 listed buildings that are included in the National Heritage List for England. That is an official database of protected heritage assets. It's a grade 3, which is the lowest of the 3 gradings given to listed buildings. It's applied to buildings of national importance and special interest. Even today, it is part of the Eaton estate of the Grosvenor family. That was the guy that I was just talking about. Duke of Westminster, I guess, is the more relevant title. And most of these are farmhouses. I find it interesting that they're protected. The earliest constructed building was St. Mary's Church in the early 16th century, and the latest one on the list was constructed in 1899, called the 3 and 4 the Square. It's a pair of cottages built for the first Duke of Westminster. By this time, I was curious about my own family because I know that I do have family that comes from this area around this time. So I looked up my own family, and they come from this area south of where we're talking about, but just kind of on the border of Wales and England, South Wales. One place is Glamorgan, which literally translates to Land of Morgan. It stands for the Welsh Prince Morgan. Another relative that's from just south of Cardiff, looking across the Bristol Channel in Exeter. This is the castle in Cardiff. This is one of hundreds of castles in Cardiff. This is what overlooks the British Channel. So we're up to chapter 9, and I'm only going to go over a few key messages. One is when he actually says that he did meet Desiderius Erasmus on 3 separate occasions when he went to Cambridge. So I did try to line that up. He talks about how he died in 1536 in Basel, Switzerland. Ken wondered, of course, how he might have known of this in his time. How would he have gotten the news of Erasmus's death in Switzerland, as well as other details like his appearance, down to what kind of rings he had on which hands. Next message that Lucas writes is basically flirting with Deb. He says things like, "You are well schooled, but I think you're rather a tomboy in some way. I do not wish to be offensive." You could tell he likes her, but he's just kind of observing her like some strange creature, because to him, ladies don't look and act like that. He ends this letter with a little bit of legal trouble. It seems that he stood up for some woman that was getting attacked, and that he was then put in a cage on a carriage. And as he was being walked into the prison, his brother came by riding on a horse heroically and took it upon himself to pull him upon the horse and whisk him away to safety. At this point, Debbie starts to just not feel right. She just is restless. She's having some poltergeist symptoms, you guys. She's having some poltergeist activity. She's not feeling right. And she has these occurrences where she gets full body chills. She feels as if somebody is weighing on her shoulder. And she says that if it happens one more time, she's leaving. She's freaked out. The next communication they get, Ken freaks out because apparently it's out of order. It's an answer to a question that he had asked a couple weeks before. It was just a question about the land, where certain things were built. It wasn't that big of a deal. Ken freaks out a lot about really silly things, in my opinion. The communication right after that, they get kind of excited about, because it happens to be, they can tell that it's on the same day. He talks about hearing the church bell, and they know that it's Sunday. He talks about some other real-world problems, like the antique business that apparently wasn't going so great for Deb, and he was like mad because she wouldn't tell him, and she was mad that he wanted to know, something like that, whatever. He just sounds overbearing. But anyway, it's just funny because they're fighting in this one part, and they're just going back and forth, and as they're fighting, they hear the chalk on the floor. You know how sometimes Lucas does these little chalk drawings. Well, while they're fighting, Lucas is just writing his name on the floor, and this is just such a good example of poltergeist activity, because they just mooch off of those negative emotions. The more negative, the better, especially if the couple is fighting. They're going to have a lot of energy to work with. That is where I'm leaning so far. Poltergeist activity is not that big of a stretch. Time travel is a huge jump and needs so much verification. Poltergeists are little tricksters. They will just fuck with you, and they will mimic people of the time. I mean, what if we just have a really nasty poltergeist on our hands? Now, this whole time, Deb is having these strange dreams. Some are waking dreams, where she does see this man. She sees all the settings of the old times. She's in the cottage, but everything is not as it was, and she sees this man. And things start kind of heating up a little bit. Okay, Poltergeist wants to get fresh with Deb. Even writes her a love note. So cute, right? I'm sure Ken is just cool with all of that. Anyway, I love that for them. And Deb seems to be sensitive to whatever this is, whether it's the ley lines, whether it's the overlapping of an alternate timeline, whatever it is, she seems to be sensitive and be able to feel it sometimes, and be able to feel Lucas's presence sometimes. Now, in the meantime, remember, they're eliminating themselves. So they have whatever that parapsychology association to kind of rule them out as suspects, right? So they have a number of messages come in while they are there, while they are gone, and other people are present. So they're officially ruled out. This actually convinces them even more that they're not being hoaxed, because it can't be either of them or anyone else, really. So Deb has one of her funny dreams again, and it's one of those dreams where she feels everything, and she's questioning herself. She's questioning her own sanity. She's questioning if she's even dreaming or not. And she sees Lucas, and the next communication they get is something that they can't really understand, but I glaze over it, and it looks like a love poem to a girl. So I think that this Lucas Wainman, that's the name he's going by anyway, I think he's quite taken with Deb. Meanwhile, he's distracting Ken, telling him to go on an errand to find what's written above a fireplace in a certain building, and apparently it's above the stairs. I don't know. Ken is really caught up on these details, but it turns out that Lucas had just made a mistake, and when he writes him back, he corrects himself and tells him where the correct inscription is, and asks him if he knows of certain classmates that he had when he was there. The next communication that comes in is kind of dramatic, so maybe I'll just read it in a dramatic tone. I saw my learned friend concerning your time. He had many a word to say, although he thinks that I am sick. He advised me well. He said that I must not tell a soul about this unknown world and about your people, else it is nothing less than a capital offense according to the crown. I immediately swore that you are honest, but that it sometimes makes some people fearful, such as my servant. Also, he asks me not write until he comes and sees the computer. So I shall speak with you 5 days from now, your good friend Lucas. Now, between these communications, there's always construction going on, remodeling of the house, which is a known agitator of poltergeist. I'm going to leave off here on page 87, and I will pick up next time. Thank you for listening.